A billionaire was seconds away from signing a $5 billion deal when a poor black maid whispered words that stopped him cold. What he did next shocked the world. "Hi, my beautiful family. Let me begin with a prayer straight from the heart. Dear God, please bless every soul watching this video. Fill their lives with peace, joy, and endless love. Amen. Welcome back, my family. You are not just viewers. You are my light during the dark days, and my reason to keep going. To all new family members, welcome to the family. Please subscribe to the channel and introduce yourself in the comments. I truly want to know more about you. My beloved family, every story I bring is not just words. It is my sweat, my sleepless nights, and my sacrifice. When you leave early, it cuts deep as if my hard work is unseen and my voice unheard. Please stay till the end. I love you. Now let's begin the story. David Alden, billionaire CEO of Alden Tech Industries, sat at the head of a sleek Manhattan conference table, cameras flashing beyond the glass walls. The deal before him, a $5 billion acquisition by Vanguard Global, wasn't just business, it was his legacy etched in history. He gripped his pen, ready to sign, as executives across the table exchanged triumphant smiles. Then the glass door creaked open. "Excuse me, sir, just cleaning up a spill," came a soft voice, barely noticed. Naomi Carter, a young black woman in a plain blue maid's uniform, shuffled in with a mop bucket, her eyes low but steady. No one paid her any mind, except David. As she leaned near his chair, wiping an imaginary spot, her lips brushed close to his ear. "Don't sign that paper. They're stealing from you." David froze, his pen slipping from his fingers and clattering softly on the table. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Naomi straightened, her face blank as she pushed her cart toward the door, as if nothing had happened. "Everything all right, Mr. Alden?" James Thorne, his business partner and oldest friend, leaned forward, brow raised. "David, this is the deal of a lifetime," another executive pressed, impatience creeping into his tone. David forced a tight smile. "I need 5 minutes." 5 minutes. James's voice sharpened, his eyes narrowing. "We're all here, David. The world's watching." But David stood, brushing past the stunned executives, and followed Naomi's retreating figure into the service hallway. In the dim corridor, he caught up to her. "You," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What did you just say?" Naomi clutched her mop, her eyes darting to ensure they were alone. "I'm sorry, sir, I shouldn't have." "Tell me now," David demanded, stepping closer. She took a shaky breath. "I overheard them last night in the executive lounge. Vanguard and your partner James. They're planning to sell your AI division to a shell company James owns. If you sign, you'll lose everything." David stared, his mind racing. This maid, this stranger, had just accused his best friend of betrayal. "You're risking your job saying this," he said, his tone hard. "Why?" Naomi met his gaze, unflinching despite her trembling hands. "Because if I stay silent and you lose it all, I'll never forgive myself." David turned away, his reflection in the hallway's glass walls staring back at him. The unsigned contract waited in the conference room, but now, for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. David stood alone in the service hallway, the echo of Naomi's footsteps fading as she pushed her cart around the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting his reflection in the glass walls. A man who, until moments ago, believed he held the world in his hands. The unsigned contract lay waiting in the conference room, its pages heavy with promises of legacy. But Naomi's words, "They're stealing from you," clawed at his mind, planting a seed of doubt that refused to be ignored. Back in his corner office, David locked the door and spread the acquisition documents across his desk. The Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his focus was on the fine print. He'd reviewed these papers a dozen times with his legal team, yet now, every clause felt like a potential trap. His eyes scanned the pages, a vague reference to an offshore escrow account, a subclause about asset transfers that seemed oddly worded. Small irregularities, easily dismissed in the rush of a $5 billion deal, now glared like cracks in a foundation. He rubbed his temples, the weight of exhaustion settling in. James Thorne, his best friend since their late-night study sessions at MIT, had been by his side through every milestone, founding Alden Tech, surviving the dot-com crash, celebrating their first billion. James, with his easy laugh and unshakable loyalty, couldn't be the architect of betrayal. Could he? David pushed the thought away, but it returned, sharp and insistent, fueled by Naomi's trembling conviction. Sleep eluded him that night. By 3 a.m., David was still at his desk, a cold coffee beside him, cross-referencing the contract against older drafts. A discrepancy caught his eye. A clause about the AI division's valuation had been altered, shaving millions off its worth in a way that benefited Vanguard Global. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to make his stomach churn. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. If Naomi was right, everything he'd built was at risk. If she was wrong, he was doubting the one person who'd always had his back. The next morning, David arrived at Alden Tech's headquarters before dawn, his tailored suit crisp but his eyes bloodshot. He bypassed the executive floor and headed straight to HR, where Linda, the department head, was already sipping her morning tea. "Mr. Alden?" Linda adjusted her glasses, surprised. "You're here early." "I need a personnel file," David said, his voice clipped. "Naomi Carter. Cleaning staff." Linda raised an eyebrow, but didn't question him. She pulled a thin folder from a cabinet and handed it over. "She's been with us for 6 months. Punctual, keeps to herself. No issues." David nodded, dismissing her with a curt thank you, and retreated to a quiet corner of the HR office. He opened the file, and his breath caught. Naomi Carter, 29, held a degree in accounting and forensic finance from Howard University, graduated magna cum laude. Her resume listed a 2-year stint at Kessler & Dunn, a top-tier consulting firm, as a forensic auditor. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Terminated after internal review." No further details. David's mind raced. A forensic auditor? Someone with her credentials should be analyzing corporate ledgers, not mopping floors. He scanned further, finding a reference letter from a professor praising Naomi's uncompromising integrity. Another document noted her request for flexible hours to accommodate family medical needs. The pieces didn't add up. Why was she here, in a dead-end job, risking everything to warn him? He found her that afternoon in the lobby, her mop gliding across the marble floor in smooth, practiced strokes. The vast space was quiet, save for the hum of a distant vacuum. Naomi's uniform was pristine, but her eyes carried a weariness that hadn't been there yesterday. "Naomi," David said, approaching her. She stiffened, her grip tightening on the mop handle. "We need to talk." She glanced around, ensuring no one was nearby. "Did you find something in the documents?" "Not yet," he said, his voice low. "But I found something about you. Howard University. Forensic finance. Kessler & Dunn. Why is someone with your credentials working as a maid?" Naomi's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked like she might walk away. Then she met his gaze, her expression a mix of defiance and pain. "Because the world doesn't reward people who tell the truth, Mr. Alden." "Explain," he said, crossing his arms. She set the mop against the wall and faced him fully. "I worked at Kessler & Dunn for 2 years. I was good, Too good, maybe. I uncovered a senior partner funneling client funds into offshore accounts. When I reported it, they didn't thank me. They called me difficult, said I didn't fit the company culture. Next thing I knew, I was out of a job, blacklisted from every major firm in the city. David studied her, searching for any sign of deceit. He found none. And now, Naomi's voice softened, but her eyes were steel. I clean offices to pay for my brother's dialysis. He's 19, Mr. Alden. Kidney failure. Every cent I earn goes to his treatments. This job has health benefits, so I keep my head down and do it. David felt a pang in his chest. Admiration for her resilience, guilt for the world that had forced her here. You could have stayed quiet yesterday, he said. Why risk it? Because I've seen what happens when people like James get away with it, she said fiercely. I lost everything calling out corruption once. But if I let them destroy you, I'd be no better than them. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You're sure about James? I heard him, she said, her jaw tight. In the executive lounge, talking to Vanguard's people. They mentioned a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Your AI division's being sold off, and James is in on it. David's throat tightened. The friend who'd toasted his successes, who'd stood by him through every storm. Was it all a lie? He wanted to argue, to defend James, but the irregularities in the contract gnawed at him. I need proof, he said finally. Hard evidence. I can get it, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. But it'll take time. Across town, in a sleek penthouse office, James Thorne paced before a wall of windows. The unsigned contract had rattled him. David's sudden hesitation, his abrupt exit from the conference room. It wasn't like him. James poured himself a scotch, his hand steady but his mind racing. He'd spent months orchestrating this deal, ensuring every detail was airtight. Vanguard's executives were growing impatient, and the shell company's accounts were already in motion. He picked up his phone and dialed a private number. It's me, he said when the call connected. Alden's stalling. I don't know why, but we need to move faster. Get the backup plan ready. The voice on the other end was calm, calculated. And the maid? She was in the room when he froze. James's grip tightened on the glass. Naomi Carter. I'll handle her. She's nobody. Back at Alden Tech, David stood in the lobby, watching Naomi resume her work. Her words echoed in his mind. If I let them destroy you, I'd be no better than them. He felt a strange kinship with her, a shared sense of fighting against a world that rewarded betrayal. But doubt still lingered, a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Was he trusting a stranger over his best friend? Or was he finally seeing the truth? Naomi paused, glancing over her shoulder. Mr. Alden, she said, her voice low and urgent. If you delay this deal too long, they'll figure out someone tipped you off. And they'll come for me first. David's blood ran cold. The lobby's polished marble seemed to tilt beneath his feet. What do you mean? I've seen how people like James operate, she said, her eyes locking onto his. They don't leave loose ends. If they think I'm the reason you're hesitating, I'm done. He stared at her, the weight of her warning settling like a stone. The contract, James, Naomi's past. Everything was unraveling, and David was caught in the middle. He nodded slowly, his voice firm despite the chaos in his mind. Get me that proof. I'll protect you. Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line, as if she wanted to believe him, but couldn't afford to. She turned back to her mop, the steady rhythm of her work a stark contrast to the storm brewing around them. David walked away, his mind a battlefield of loyalty and suspicion. The deal was still alive, but time was running out. And somewhere, in the shadows, James was making his next move. David stood in his office, the Manhattan skyline a blur beyond the windows as Naomi's warning echoed in his mind. If you delay this deal too long, they'll come for me first. The contract, still unsigned, sat on his desk like a ticking bomb. He'd spent the morning poring over the documents again, the irregularities Naomi had pointed out now glaringly obvious. A shell company buried in fine print, a transfer clause that didn't align with the original terms. But suspicion wasn't proof, and accusing James, his friend of over a decade, required more than a maid's word and his own unease. At noon, a soft knock broke his focus. Naomi stood at the door, her cleaning cart absent, her hands clutching a small black USB drive. Her eyes darted to the hallway before she stepped inside and closed the door. "You said you needed proof," she whispered, holding out the drive. "This is everything I've got." David took it, his fingers brushing hers. "What's on it?" "Photos of documents from James's office. Recorded conversations. Copies of contracts I found in the executive lounge." Naomi's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I overheard James and Clara Morgan from Vanguard Global 2 nights ago. They were laughing about how your signature would transfer the AI division to a shell company they control. You'd be left with nothing." David's jaw tightened. Clara Morgan, Vanguard's sharp-tongued financial strategist, had been at every meeting, her polished smile never wavering. He plugged the USB into his laptop, the screen flickering to life with files. Photos of contracts showed handwritten notes in James's scrawl, outlining a transfer to a Cayman Islands entity. A grainy audio file captured Clara's voice, smooth and cold. "Once Alden signs, the AI division's ours. He's too busy chasing legacy to notice." James's laugh followed, unmistakable and chilling. David leaned back, his pulse racing. "How did you get this?" Naomi hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I've been cleaning their offices for months. They talk like I'm invisible. I started taking photos when I saw things that didn't add up. The recordings. I used my phone when they left me alone in the lounge." "You could go to jail for this," David said, his voice low. "Why take the risk?" Her gaze snapped up, fierce despite the fear in her eyes. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything to people like them. I won't let it happen to you." David studied her, the weight of her words settling over him. The evidence was damning, but he needed more, something undeniable before he could confront James. "I'll review this tonight," he said. "Stay quiet until I figure out our next move." Naomi nodded, but her expression was grim. "Be careful, Mr. Alden. They're watching you now." She slipped out, leaving David alone with the USB and a growing sense of dread. The evidence was compelling, but a small part of him clung to the hope that James, his college roommate who'd shared cheap beers and big dreams, couldn't be this duplicitous. He copied the files to a secure drive and hid the USB in his desk drawer, his mind a battlefield of trust and betrayal. That afternoon, David was in the middle of cross-referencing the contracts when his phone buzzed. A text from Linda in HR, urgent. "Issue with Naomi Carter. Come to HR now." His stomach dropped. He grabbed his jacket and hurried to the HR office on the 10th floor, where he found Naomi standing before Linda's desk, flanked by 2 security guards. James stood nearby, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold authority. The air was thick with tension. "What's going on?" David demanded, his eyes flicking from Naomi's pale face to James's icy stare. Linda cleared her throat, holding up a manila folder. "Naomi's been accused of breaching company confidentiality. We found photos of classified documents on her phone, deal memos, financials, even drafts of the Vanguard contract." "That's a lie." Naomi's voice cracked, her hands clenched at her sides. "I didn't." "Save it," James cut in, his tone sharp as a blade. We have proof, Miss Carter. Screenshots, timestamps, everything. You've been spying on Alden Tech, haven't you? David's heart pounded. The USB in his desk flashed in his mind. Naomi's evidence, not espionage. But the accusation hung heavy, and the room's eyes turned to him. Naomi, David said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Is this true? Her eyes met his, wide with desperation. You know it's not. You saw what I gave you. They're setting me up because I told you the truth. James stepped forward, his voice low and deliberate. David, she's a liability. A corporate spy, feeding information to God knows who. We can't risk this, not with the deal on the line. Naomi shook her head, her voice trembling but resolute. Mr. Alden, I risked everything to warn you. They're framing me to keep you in the dark. Please believe me. David's mind raced. The evidence on the USB was real. He'd heard James's voice, seen the altered contracts. But James's accusation was calculated, backed by HR's proof. If he defended Naomi now, he'd tip his hand, exposing his doubts about the deal. If he stayed silent, he'd betray the woman who'd risked her livelihood for him. The room waited, the silence suffocating. Cameras in the corner blinked red, recording every moment. Linda shifted uncomfortably, and the security guards exchanged glances. David, James pressed, his eyes narrowing. We need to act. She's a threat to everything we've built. Naomi's gaze locked onto David, pleading, vulnerable. You know the truth, she said softly. Don't let them win. David opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. Doubt, fear, and loyalty to James tangled inside him. He saw Naomi's face, the courage it took to stand there, accused and alone. But the weight of the deal, the cameras, the years with James, it was too much. He said nothing. Linda nodded to the guards. Escort Miss Carter out. Naomi's shoulders slumped, but her eyes burned with a mix of hurt and defiance. As the guards took her arms, she leaned toward David, her voice a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. When you find out the truth, remember this moment. The guards led her away, her footsteps echoing down the hall. David stood frozen, the weight of his silence crushing him. James clapped a hand on his shoulder, his smile thin. You did the right thing, David. We can't let people like her derail us. David forced a nod, but his chest tightened with guilt. Naomi had risked everything, her job, her brother's care, her safety, to warn him. And he'd let her walk away, branded a traitor. Back in his office, David locked the door and pulled the USB from his drawer. He replayed the audio, Clara Morgan's voice chillingly clear. Alden's too busy chasing legacy to notice. James's laugh followed, a sound David once found comforting, now laced with poison. He opened the photos, zooming in on James's handwritten notes. The shell company, the hidden transfers, it was all there. Naomi had been telling the truth. He sank into his chair, the city's lights blurring beyond the windows. The memory of Naomi's final words haunted him. Remember this moment. He'd failed her, let fear and doubt silence him when she needed him most. The guilt was a physical ache, a reminder of the man he thought he was versus the one who'd stood silent. David's phone buzzed, a text from James. Meeting with Vanguard tomorrow, 9 a.m. Let's close this deal. The words felt like a challenge, a test of his loyalty. But Naomi's evidence burned in his mind, and her sacrifice demanded action. He opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his legal team, attaching Naomi's files. If James and Vanguard thought they could bury the truth, they were wrong. David wouldn't sign, not yet. But he needed a plan, and he needed it fast. As he typed, Naomi's face lingered in his thoughts, her courage a stark contrast to his hesitation. He'd made a mistake today, but he wouldn't make another. The deal, James, the betrayal, it was all coming to light. And David vowed to make it right, no matter the cost. David sat alone in his office, the city's glow beyond the windows a distant blur. The clock read 2 a.m., but sleep was impossible. Naomi's final words: "When you find out the truth, remember this moment," cut deeper with every passing hour. The USB she'd given him lay on his desk, its contents a ticking bomb he could no longer ignore. His silence in the HR office haunted him, a betrayal of the woman who'd risked everything to warn him. He opened his laptop and pulled up the merger documents, Naomi's photos arranged side by side on a second screen. He cross-referenced every line, his eyes burning from exhaustion. The contract he'd nearly signed was riddled with discrepancies. Forged pages had slipped past his legal team, swapping out key clauses with versions that funneled Alden Tech's AI division to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Offshore transfer records, buried in Naomi's files, linked to accounts bearing James's initials, JT Holdings. A secret clause, tucked into an appendix, ensured David would lose control of his company the moment he signed. The truth hit like a punch to the gut. Naomi had been right all along. James, his best friend, the man who'd stood by him through every triumph and failure, had orchestrated a betrayal so meticulous it made David's skin crawl. The laughter in Naomi's recording, James's voice mocking his trust, played on a loop in his mind. He slammed his laptop shut, his breath ragged. How had he been so blind? Guilt gnawed at him. Naomi had lost her job, her reputation tarnished, because he'd hesitated. He couldn't undo that moment in the HR office, but he could make it right. He grabbed his coat and keys, the decision made before he could second-guess it. He needed to see her. The drive to Brooklyn was a blur, the city's lights streaking past as David navigated to the address in Naomi's HR file. Her apartment was in a weathered brick building, the kind where the elevator groaned and the hallway smelled faintly of mildew. He knocked softly on her door, his heart pounding. It was nearly 4 a.m. What was he doing here? The door cracked open, and Naomi stood there, her eyes red from exhaustion, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She wore an oversized sweatshirt, her expression hardening at the sight of him. Behind her, a small living room held a worn couch and a table cluttered with medical supplies. A teenage boy, her brother, Malik, David assumed, lay sleeping on the couch, a dialysis machine humming softly beside him. "What do you want, Mr. Alden?" Naomi's voice was cold, her arms crossed. "It's a little late for apologies." David swallowed, the weight of her distrust heavy. "I reviewed your files. The contracts, the recordings, everything. You were right. James is stealing the company. I'm here to say I'm sorry." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She stepped aside, letting him in, though her posture screamed wariness. The apartment was cramped, the walls lined with photos of Naomi and Malik, a younger, healthier Malik, smiling at a park. David's chest ached at the contrast. "I failed you today," he said, his voice low. "You risked everything, and I stood there and let them take you away. I was wrong." Naomi's eyes flickered with something. Pain, maybe, or guarded hope, but her voice stayed sharp. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Alden. I've been through worse." "This isn't pity," David said, stepping closer. "You saved me from losing everything. I owe you more than an apology. Your brother, Malik, right? I can pay for his treatment. Anonymously, through a foundation. Whatever you need." Naomi's gaze hardened. "I don't take charity. I've been offered handouts before, and they always come with strings. If you really want to help, expose the truth. Stop James and Vanguard before they ruin anyone else." David nodded, her resolve igniting something in him. "I want to, but I need more evidence. something airtight to take them down. Naomi studied him, as if weighing his sincerity. Then she turned to a small kitchen counter, pulling a notebook from a drawer. "There's a data drive," she said, her voice low, "hidden in the company server, in a restricted folder labeled Vanguard Archives. I couldn't access it myself, but it has the original contracts and transfer records, proof of everything James and Clara Morgan are doing." "How do you know it's there?" David asked, his brow furrowing. "I overheard Clara mention it to James last week," Naomi said. "They thought I was just the maid, invisible. But I listen. Always have." David felt a surge of respect, tinged with shame for ever doubting her. "We'll do this together," he said. "I'll get into the server tonight. But Naomi, you're not safe. James is already moving against you." She gave a bitter laugh. "I've been a target before. I'll survive." "No," David said firmly. "Not this time. I'll protect you, whatever it takes." Naomi's expression softened, just for a moment, before she nodded. "Get that drive, Mr. Alden. Then we'll talk." He left her apartment with a new resolve, the image of Malik's dialysis machine and Naomi's fierce determination burned into his mind. She wasn't just fighting for him. She was fighting for her brother, for justice, for a world that had tried to break her and failed. David wouldn't let her down again. Back at Alden Tech, the office was a ghost town, the only sound the hum of air conditioning. David sat at his desk, the server login screen glowing on his monitor. He typed in his executive credentials, navigating to the restricted folder Naomi had described. Vanguard Archives appeared, locked behind an encryption key. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Accessing this without permission could end his career if he was wrong. But Naomi's evidence, her sacrifice, left no room for doubt. He cracked the folder after several attempts, using an old override code from the company's early days. Files flooded the screen. Original contracts, unredacted transfer orders, emails between James and Clara Morgan detailing the shell company's setup. It was all there, a digital trail of betrayal. David's heart raced as he copied the files to a secure drive, his hands shaking with the weight of the truth. A shadow fell across his desk. David froze, his eyes snapping to the doorway. James stood there, leaning against the frame, his smile sharp and knowing. "Late night, David," he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "Accessing restricted files, are we?" David's pulse thundered, but he kept his expression neutral, closing the laptop slowly. "Just double-checking some details, James. You know how I am." James's smile didn't waver, but his eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "Careful, old friend. You're playing a risky game." David held his gaze, the air between them crackling with unspoken accusations. James turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silent office. David exhaled, his hands clenched into fists. The data drive burned in his pocket, a lifeline to the truth, and a ticking clock. James knew something was up, and David was running out of time to act. David's office felt like a cage, the data drive in his pocket a heavy secret. James's knowing smile from the night before lingered in his mind, a silent challenge that made every shadow seem threatening. The server files had confirmed Naomi's warnings. Forged contracts, hidden transfers, James's betrayal laid bare. But David needed to move carefully. One wrong step, and James would bury him. At 9 a.m., James strode into David's office without knocking, his tailored suit impeccable, his smile a practiced mask of concern. He leaned against the desk, too close for comfort. "You've been distant lately, David," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something colder. "Late nights, secret meetings. Everything okay?" David met his gaze, keeping his expression neutral. "Just dotting the I's on the Vanguard deal. You know how I am." James's eyes narrowed slightly, his smile tightening. I do. But in business, trust is everything. We've built this together, you and me. Don't let doubts, or the wrong people, cloud your judgment. The words hung heavy, a veiled threat wrapped in camaraderie. David's pulse quickened, but he forced a nod. I hear you, James. We're good. James clapped his shoulder, the gesture too firm. Good. Let's keep it that way. He left, his footsteps echoing with a confidence that set David's nerves on edge. James wasn't just suspicious, he was testing him, probing for cracks. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi slipped into Alden Tech's building after hours, her heart pounding. The office was dark, the only light from the security monitors flickering in the lobby. She'd hidden backup evidence, photos and notes, in a maintenance closet on the 12th floor, a precaution in case the USB was compromised. With David's promise to protect her, she'd taken the risk to retrieve it, knowing the data drive he'd accessed might not be enough. She moved silently, her cleaning uniform granting her invisibility in the familiar halls. But as she reached the closet, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Hey, what are you doing here? A security guard barked, his hand on his radio. Naomi froze, her breath catching. I forgot something in the closet. Cleaning supplies. The guard's eyes narrowed, his radio crackling. You're not supposed to be here. Stay put. He stepped closer, blocking her exit. Before Naomi could respond, the elevator dinged. David stepped out, his presence commanding despite the late hour. She's here on my orders, he said, his voice calm but firm. Data verification for the Vanguard deal. I asked her to check some records. The guard hesitated, glancing between David and Naomi. Sir, I wasn't informed. You are now, David cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'll take it from here. The guard nodded reluctantly and retreated, his flashlight beam fading. Naomi exhaled, her hands trembling as she met David's gaze. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Yes, I did, David replied, his voice low. I owe you more than that. They moved to his office, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Naomi handed him a small envelope from the closet, photos of additional contract drafts, her notes scrawled in the margins. As they sat at his desk, their shoulders brushing, David felt a flicker of something new, an admiration that went beyond respect, a connection forged in shared risk. Naomi's eyes met his briefly, then darted away, as if she felt it too. Using her notes, David accessed another restricted server folder, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Naomi's lead had been precise. A subfolder labeled Vanguard Correspondence held audio files. He clicked one, and Clara Morgan's voice filled the room, crisp and calculating. Once Alden's out, the AI patents go to our buyer in Singapore. They're worth triple what we're paying. James's voice followed, smug and certain. David won't see it coming. He's too busy playing hero. David's breath caught, his hands clenching into fists. The betrayal was worse than he'd imagined. Not just his company, but its core innovation, sold off to foreign investors. Then Clara's voice returned, and a new shock hit him. You were right about him, James. He's still the same naive dreamer I left. David froze, his heart twisting. Clara Morgan, his ex-lover, the woman who'd walked out 5 years ago, citing different paths. Her departure had shattered him, leaving scars he'd buried under work and ambition. Now she was here, orchestrating his ruin alongside James. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected, anger and heartbreak warring in his chest. Naomi watched him, her expression softening. You knew her, she said quietly, not a question. David nodded, his voice rough. We were together for 2 years. She left me when Alden Tech was just starting. Said I was too focused on dreams that wouldn't pay off. He laughed bitterly. Guess she found a better bet in James. Naomi leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. You can't fight corruption with emotion, Mr. Alden. Clara and James, they're counting on you being hurt, distracted. You have to outsmart them. Her words snapped him back, grounding him. She was right. Anger wouldn't save his company, and heartbreak wouldn't bring justice. He met her gaze, her resolve a mirror to his own. Then let's do this right, he said. We expose them, publicly undeniable proof, no way for them to spin it. Naomi nodded, pulling out her notebook. We use the server files, contracts, transfers, the audio. Leak them to the press, but anonymously, so James doesn't see it coming. I know a reporter at the Times who covers corporate fraud. She'll run with it if we get her the evidence. David's mind raced, piecing together a plan. We need to stage it carefully. A public reveal at the right moment, maybe during a press conference. If we time it right, James and Clara won't have a chance to counter. They worked late into the night, drafting a timeline. David would compile the server files, while Naomi would contact her reporter contact discreetly. They'd need to move fast. James's suspicion was growing, and the guard's report might already have tipped him off. As they finalized their strategy, David felt the weight of their alliance. Naomi wasn't just a whistleblower. She was his partner in this fight, her courage a beacon in the storm. As Naomi gathered her notes to leave, David touched her arm lightly. Thank you, he said, his voice soft, for not giving up on me. She offered a small, guarded smile. Don't thank me yet. We're not done. David watched her go, the office falling silent again. He turned back to the server, encrypting their files to ensure they were safe. The plan was set, but the stakes felt higher than ever. Clara's betrayal stung, but Naomi's words, outsmart them, kept him focused. The next morning, David's phone buzzed as he sipped coffee in his office. An email from James, marked urgent. Press conference scheduled for 3 p.m. today. Final signing of the Vanguard deal. Your presence isn't required. This is my moment to shine. The words were polite, but the message was clear. James was moving forward without him. A public power play to seal the deal and cut David out. David stared at the screen, his blood running cold. The conference was a trap, a chance for James to lock in the fraudulent merger before David could act. He forwarded the email to Naomi, his fingers trembling with urgency. Their plan had to move now, or they'd lose everything. James's smile from the night before flashed in his mind, that knowing glint a warning. The game was on, and David was playing against a man who'd already betrayed him twice. He gripped the data drive in his pocket, Naomi's words echoing. Outsmart them. The press conference loomed, and with it, their one chance to turn the tables. The press conference loomed like a guillotine. David gripped his phone, James's email. Your presence isn't required, burning in his mind. The audacity of it, scheduling the final signing of the Vanguard deal without him, was a clear move to cut him out. Naomi's warning echoed. Outsmart them. But time was slipping away. The data drive in his pocket held the truth. Forged contracts. Audio of James and Clara Morgan plotting to sell Alden Tech's AI patents. But exposing it required precision. David and Naomi had planned to leak the evidence to the Times, but James's sudden acceleration of the signing forced their hand. At 2:30 p.m., David stood outside the conference hall on Alden Tech's top floor, the murmur of reporters and flashing cameras seeping through the glass doors. Naomi was at her apartment, finalizing the anonymous tip to her reporter contact, but David couldn't wait. He adjusted his tie, the weight of the drive a lifeline in his pocket, and steeled himself. This was his company, his legacy. James wouldn't steal it without a fight. Inside, James stood at a podium, his smile polished as he addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that David Alden is unwell and unable to attend today, he said, his voice dripping with feigned concern. But as acting CEO, with full authority, I'm proud to finalize our historic merger with Vanguard Global. The crowd applauded, cameras flashing. David's blood boiled. Acting CEO? He pushed through the doors, his presence silencing the room. Reporters turned, eyes wide, as he strode toward the stage. I'm not unwell, James, David said, his voice steady but sharp. And I'm still CEO. Gasps rippled through the crowd. James's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, holding up a folder. David, you shouldn't be here, he said, his tone patronizing. Not after what we've uncovered. David froze, sensing a trap. What are you talking about? James turned to the crowd, his expression grave. It pains me to say this, but evidence has come to light that David Alden has been siphoning company funds into personal offshore accounts. He raised a tablet, displaying bank transfer records, David's name, account numbers, millions moved to a Cayman Islands entity. This betrayal leaves us no choice but to suspend him, pending a federal investigation. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing like gunfire. David's heart sank as he scanned the forged documents on the screen. The accounts weren't his. They mirrored the ones he'd found linked to James. The reversal was brilliant, vicious. This is a lie, David said, his voice cutting through the chaos. James, you know. And that's not all, James interrupted, his eyes gleaming. We've traced this scheme to a co-conspirator, Naomi Carter, a former employee caught with classified documents. She's been working with David to undermine Alden Tech. The mention of Naomi's name hit David like a blow. The crowd's frenzy intensified, headlines already forming. David opened his mouth to protest, but security guards flanked him, their presence a silent command. Mr. Alden, one said, you need to leave. Humiliation burned through him as he was escorted out, cameras capturing every step. The glass doors closed behind him, muffling the chaos but not the sting. His reputation, his company, his legacy, shattered in minutes. James had outmaneuvered him, turning the truth into a weapon against him. And Naomi, already vulnerable, was now a target. Back in his office, David sank into his chair, the data drive useless in his pocket. The Times leak hadn't hit yet. James's move had been too fast. A federal investigation loomed, and with Naomi implicated, her life was unraveling alongside his. He'd promised to protect her, but he'd failed again. The weight of it crushed him, his reflection in the dark window a stranger, disgraced, powerless. Across town, Naomi sat in her Brooklyn apartment, the hum of Malik's dialysis machine a constant reminder of her stakes. The news had already spread, her name plastered across headlines as a corporate spy. Her phone buzzed with threats from anonymous numbers, accusing her of betrayal. Malik, pale and weak on the couch, looked up. Sis, what's going on? They're saying you stole from that company. It's a lie, Malik, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her. They're framing me because I know too much. Malik's breathing was labored, his condition worsening with every missed treatment. The health insurance tied to her job was gone, and their savings couldn't cover the next dialysis session. She clenched her fists, fighting tears. She'd risked everything to warn David, and now they were both ruined. A knock at the door startled her. David stood there, his suit rumpled, his eyes hollow. Naomi, he said, his voice raw. I'm so sorry. They took everything from me, my company, my name. But they didn't take the truth. And that's what we'll use. Naomi's gaze hardened, her trust frayed. You said you'd protect me. Now my brother's life is on the line, and I'm a criminal in the news. What truth is left, Mr. Alden? David stepped inside, shutting the door, The truth on that drive. The audio, the contracts, it's all real. James and Clara framed us to cover their tracks, but we can still expose them. The Times reporter, you said she's ready to run the story. Naomi shook her head, her voice bitter. The reporter backed out. Said the story's too hot now with the feds involved. We're out of moves. David knelt beside her, his eyes burning with resolve. We're not. James thinks he's won, but he doesn't know we have the server files. We go bigger, straight to the SEC, the FBI. We make it impossible for him to hide. Naomi looked at Malik, his shallow breaths a knife in her heart. I can't fight this if I lose him, she whispered. His dialysis, we can't afford it now. David's throat tightened. I'll find a way to cover it. No strings, I promise. But we need you, Naomi. You're the one who saw through this from the start. She met his gaze, her anger softening into something else. Shared defiance, a flicker of hope. If we do this, we do it my way. No mistakes. We hit them where it hurts. They sat at her small kitchen table, mapping out a desperate plan. Naomi suggested bypassing the press entirely, sending the server files directly to the SEC with a detailed affidavit. David would use his remaining board connections to demand an emergency audit, forcing James's hand. It was risky. James's forged evidence had painted them as criminals, but the truth was their only weapon. As they worked, Malik stirred, his voice weak. Naomi, you okay? She forced a smile, brushing his forehead. I'm fine, little man. Just rest. But moments later, Malik's breathing grew ragged, his body slumping against the couch. Naomi's heart stopped. Malik! She rushed to him, checking his pulse as the dialysis machine beeped erratically. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. David grabbed his phone, dialing 911. Stay with him, he said, his voice steady despite the panic. I'll get help. Naomi cradled her brother, tears streaming down her face. Hold on, Malik. Please. The room spun, her world narrowing to his fading breaths. She'd fought for the truth, for David, for justice, but now, with Malik collapsing, she faced a heartbreaking decision. Keep fighting or save the only family she had left. As sirens wailed in the distance, David knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this, he whispered. Together. But Naomi's eyes were locked on Malik, her resolve cracking under the weight of loss. The truth was their weapon, but time was their enemy, and it was running out. Naomi sat by Malik's hospital bed, the steady beep of the heart monitor a fragile tether to hope. His collapse the night before had been a blur. Paramedics, flashing lights, David's steady hand on her shoulder as they rushed to the ER. Malik was stable now, but his kidney failure was worsening, and without her job's insurance, the next dialysis session loomed like a debt she couldn't pay. The weight of her choices, warning David, losing everything, pressed down, threatening to break her. She clutched Malik's hand, whispering, I'm here, little man. I'm not giving up. A soft rustle snapped her out of her thoughts. An envelope had been slipped under the hospital room door, unmarked except for a scrawled note. Insurance policy. JT. Naomi's heart raced. JT. James Thorne. She tore it open, revealing a small flash drive. Her hands trembled as she tucked it into her pocket, glancing at Malik. She couldn't leave him, but this couldn't wait. At dawn, Naomi found David in his apartment, a stark contrast to her cramped Brooklyn home. He looked as broken as she felt, his suit replaced by a rumpled sweater, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. The news still looped on his TV. Alden Tech CEO suspended amid fraud allegations, his face plastered beside hers as co-conspirators. He stood as she entered, concern etching his features. Naomi, how's Malik? Stable, for now, she said, her voice raw. She held up the flash drive. This was left at the hospital. It's labeled JT. I haven't checked it yet. David's eyes widened. He grabbed his laptop, and they sat at his dining table, the city's morning light filtering through the windows. He plugged in the drive, revealing a single audio file. Naomi's breath caught as he clicked play. James's voice filled the room, smug and calculated. Once David signs, we erase the backup, sell off the assets, and disappear. No one will suspect a thing, not even that maid who overheard us. Clara Morgan's laugh followed, sharp and cruel. She's a nobody. Even if she talks, who'll believe her? The recording ended, and silence gripped them. Naomi's fists clenched, her anger flaring at James's dismissal. David's face was a storm of betrayal and resolve. They recorded everything, he said, his voice low. This is it, the proof we need to bury them. Naomi nodded, but fear gnawed at her. Whoever sent this knows I'm involved. If I step into this again, Malik could pay the price. David leaned forward, his gaze steady. We'll protect him. I swear it, Naomi. You and Malik, you're not alone anymore. Her eyes searched his, finding sincerity that cracked her guarded walls. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a maid, not as a whistleblower, but as a partner. Okay, she said softly. What's our move? David stood, pacing as his mind raced. We take this to the feds. Not just the SEC, the FBI. This recording, plus the server files, proves fraud, conspiracy, everything. But we need to hit James where it hurts most, publicly, where he can't spin it. Naomi's brow furrowed. He's too careful. He'll cover his tracks. Not if we set a trap, David said. James is hosting an investor conference tomorrow to finalize the merger. It's his victory lap. We work with the feds to turn it into a sting. Let him incriminate himself live. Naomi hesitated, her thoughts on Malik's hospital bed. If this goes wrong, they'll come for me again. I can't lose him, David. He stopped pacing and knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. I won't let that happen. I've got contacts, lawyers, private security. I'll cover Malik's treatment, whatever it takes. But we need you, Naomi. You're the one who saw the truth when I was blind. Her breath hitched, his touch grounding her. The walls she'd built, forged by betrayal at Kessler and Dunn, by a world that dismissed her, began to crumble. David wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was a man who'd lost everything, just like her, and still chose to fight. She squeezed his hand, a silent agreement. Let's do it. For Malik. For your company. For the truth. They spent the day planning, their partnership deepening with every shared glance. David contacted a trusted FBI agent, a former classmate who'd worked corporate fraud cases. He sent the flash drive and server files, outlining the conspiracy. The agent confirmed. A sting was possible, but it required David and Naomi to deliver the evidence in person at the conference, wired for audio to capture James's reaction. It was risky. James's forged accusations still hung over them, but it was their only shot. Naomi's mind drifted to Malik, his fragile smile in the hospital. She'd always fought alone, but David's presence, his quiet strength, felt like a lifeline. As they reviewed the plan, their shoulders brushing, she caught him watching her, not with pity, but with something warmer. Respect. Care. Maybe more. Her heart stirred, but she pushed it aside. They had a war to win first. That evening, David arranged for a private medical fund to cover Malik's dialysis, anonymous to honor Naomi's pride. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes, fierce yet vulnerable, said enough. Their bond had grown beyond business, a trust forged in shared loss and defiance. As they parted, David touched her arm. Tomorrow we end this. Naomi nodded, her voice steady. No mistakes. The next morning, David woke to a breaking news alert on his phone. James was live on national TV, standing before a sea of cameras at Alden Tech's investor conference. "Today marks a historic moment," James declared, his smile radiant. "The merger with Vanguard Global will redefine Alden Tech's future." David's stomach twisted. The trap was set. The FBI was in place, the evidence ready, but James's confidence was unnerving. He and Naomi would walk into the lion's den, wired and exposed, to confront a man who'd already framed them once. The flash drive, the server files, their plan, it all hinged on this moment. As David grabbed his coat and headed for the conference, Naomi's words echoed. No mistakes. The world was watching, and the truth was their only weapon. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation. Cameras trained on James Thorne as he stood at the podium, his voice smooth and commanding. "Today, Alden Tech embarks on a new era," he declared, gesturing to the Vanguard Global executives beside him, Clara Morgan's polished smile gleaming under the lights. "This merger will redefine innovation, and I'm honored to lead us forward." The crowd of investors and reporters applauded, unaware of the trap about to spring. Backstage, Naomi clutched the flash drive labeled insurance policy. JT, her hands trembling as she stood beside the AV technician, a young man briefed by the FBI. Her heart pounded, Malik's pale face flashing in her mind. He was stable in the hospital, but the cost of his treatment loomed, and this moment, exposing James and Clara, could cost her everything. She glanced at the monitor showing James's speech, his confidence a stark contrast to the truth she held. The technician nodded, ready to cue the audio. Naomi took a shaky breath, whispering to herself, "No mistakes." David stood at the hall's entrance, the data drive in his pocket, a silent vow. The FBI agents, discreetly positioned in the crowd, gave him a subtle nod. His suspension, the forged accusations, the media frenzy, it all led to this. He adjusted his tie, his pulse steady despite the storm inside him. Naomi's courage, her sacrifice for her brother, had brought them here. He wouldn't let her down again. As James raised a pen to sign the merger documents, David pushed through the doors, his presence slicing through the applause. Heads turned, gasps rippling through the crowd. James froze, his smile faltering as David strode to the stage, his voice cutting through the hall like a blade. "Before you applaud betrayal, let's play a recording." The room fell silent, all eyes on David. Clara's face paled, her hand gripping the table. James forced a laugh, but it was strained. "David, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," David said, nodding to the AV booth. Naomi's cue was flawless. The speakers crackled, and James's voice filled the hall, smug and unmistakable. "Once David signs, we erase the backup, sell off the assets, and disappear. No one will suspect a thing, not even that maid who overheard us." Clara's laugh followed, cruel and sharp. "She's a nobody. Even if she talks, who'll believe her?" Gasps erupted, cameras flashing like a thunderstorm. Reporters shouted questions, investors murmuring in shock. James's face drained of color, his hands fumbling with the podium. "This is a fabrication," he stammered, but his voice was drowned by the chaos. Clara tried to slip toward the exit, but FBI agents blocked her path, their badges glinting under the lights. David turned to the crowd, his voice steady but fierce. This merger was a lie, built on fraud and betrayal. James Thorne and Clara Morgan planned to steal Alden Tech's AI division, selling it to foreign investors while framing me, and an innocent woman, for their crimes. The hall's doors opened again, and Naomi stepped onto the stage, her head high despite the tremble in her hands. The crowd's murmurs grew as they recognized her from the headlines. The Maid, the co-conspirator. She stood beside David, her presence a quiet defiance. The flash drive was gone, handed to the FBI, but its truth echoed in the room. Naomi Carter risked everything to warn me, David said, his eyes locking with hers. She was fired, slandered, and threatened, but she never backed down. This company owes her its survival. FBI agents moved swiftly, cuffing James and Clara as the crowd erupted in cheers. James's protests were lost in the clamor, his polished facade crumbling as he was led away. Clara's eyes met David's, a flicker of regret passing through them, but he turned away. Her betrayal, once a wound, was now just a footnote. Naomi's breath caught as the cheers washed over her. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. David stepped closer, his voice low, meant only for her. They called you a maid, but today you cleaned this company's soul. She smiled through her tears, a fragile but radiant expression. I just did what was right, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. David faced the crowd again, raising a hand to quiet them. Effective immediately, I'm reinstating Naomi Carter to Alden Tech. Not as a cleaner, but as head of corporate ethics, a role she's proven she was born for. He turned to her, his eyes warm with respect. If she'll accept it. The crowd roared, applause thundering through the hall. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. She nodded, unable to speak, her heart swelling with a pride she hadn't felt since her days at Kessler and Dunn. The weight of years, blacklisting, sacrifice, invisibility, lifted, replaced by a future she'd never dared imagine. As the FBI cleared the stage and reporters swarmed for interviews, David and Naomi stepped backstage, the chaos fading behind a curtain. Alone for a moment, David took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. You didn't just save my company, Naomi. You saved me from becoming someone I'd hate. Her eyes met his, the bond between them no longer just partnership, but something deeper, unspoken but undeniable. You gave me a chance to fight again, she said softly. For Malik, for myself. Thank you. They stood there, hands clasped, the weight of their shared journey settling into a quiet strength. The cameras, the crowd, the victory, it all paled against the trust they'd built, a foundation stronger than any merger. Naomi's tears dried, replaced by a resolve that matched David's own. They'd won this battle, but the war for Alden Tech's future was just beginning. As they prepared to face the press, David's phone buzzed with a hospital update. Malik was awake, asking for Naomi. Relief flooded her, but the cost of his treatment still loomed. David squeezed her hand. We'll take care of him, he said. Together. Naomi nodded, her smile steady. The stage awaited, the world watching, but for the first time, they faced it as equals, bound by truth and a shared fight for justice. Months had passed since the press conference that shook Alden Tech to its core. The headlines had shifted from scandal to salvation. Alden Tech saved by whistleblowers' courage. Under Naomi Carter's leadership as head of corporate ethics, the company had undergone a transformation. Transparent audits, rebuilt investor trust, and a renewed focus on innovation had restored Alden Tech's reputation, its AI division thriving once more. The boardroom, once a battleground of betrayal, now hummed with purpose, and Naomi's voice, once dismissed as that of a maid, guided its moral compass. Naomi stood in her new office, a modest space with a view of Manhattan's skyline, her Howard University degree framed on the wall. She ran her fingers over the frame, a reminder of the journey from blacklisting to redemption. Her phone buzzed with a hospital update. Malik's latest tests showed improvement, his kidney function stabilizing after a life-saving treatment. The anonymous donation that had covered his care was a mystery she'd pieced together, and today she needed answers. She found David in the executive lounge, reviewing quarterly reports. He looked different now, less guarded, his smile warmer than the polished CEO she'd first met. The weight of James's betrayal and Clara's manipulation had faded, replaced by a quiet strength. He glanced up as she entered, his eyes softening. "Naomi, everything okay?" She crossed her arms, her tone firm but not unkind. "The donation for Malik's treatment. It was you, wasn't it?" David set down his tablet, a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. "I thought I covered my tracks better than that." "You did," Naomi said, stepping closer. "But I'm a forensic auditor, remember? I know how to follow a trail." Her voice softened, gratitude breaking through. "Why didn't you tell me?" David stood, meeting her gaze. "Because you saved my life first, Naomi. My company, my purpose, everything I am today, is because you risked it all. Helping Malik was the least I could do." Her throat tightened, tears prickling her eyes. She'd spent years fighting alone, her trust eroded by a world that punished truth. But David had seen her, fought for her, and now stood here, offering not pity but partnership. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heavy with meaning. "For Malik. For believing in me." He shook his head, his voice low. "Don't thank me. You're the one who changed everything." Their eyes held, a silent understanding passing between them. The distance that once separated them, billionaire and maid, privilege and struggle, had dissolved in the crucible of their shared fight. What began as a partnership forged in crisis had grown into something deeper, a friendship rooted in respect, now blossoming into something neither dared name. Over the weeks, their connection deepened. Late-night strategy sessions turned into coffee breaks filled with laughter, stories of Malik's recovery mingling with David's memories of building Alden Tech from a dorm room dream. Naomi found herself lingering in his presence, his steady warmth a contrast to the chaos she'd known. David, too, felt the shift. Her courage, her unyielding integrity, had become his anchor, a reminder of the man he wanted to be. One crisp autumn evening, David invited Naomi to the rooftop of Alden Tech's headquarters, the same skyscraper where she'd once whispered her warning. The city sparkled below, a tapestry of lights stretching to the horizon. They stood side by side, the air cool but charged with something unspoken. Naomi's hair caught the breeze, and David watched her, his heart full. "Naomi," he said, his voice soft but steady, "when you walked into that conference room a year ago, you were a stranger. A maid with a mop, someone I might have overlooked. But you were my warning, my conscience, my second chance." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "You made me see the world differently, see myself differently." Naomi's breath caught, her heart racing. She'd spent so long guarding herself, protecting Malik, surviving. But David's words, his presence, broke through her walls. She wanted to speak, but her voice faltered, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. David took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. He knelt, the city lights framing him, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let me be your second chance, Naomi. Your partner, your home, whatever you'll let me be. I love you, and I want to build a future with you, not as a CEO or a savior, but as a man who sees you for everything you are." Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks, not from pain, but from a joy she'd never thought possible. She'd been the invisible maid, the blacklisted auditor, the sister fighting for her brother's life. But here, with David, she was Naomi Carter, seen, valued, loved. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, David." He rose, pulling her into his arms, and they embraced, the city shimmering below like a promise kept. Two souls from different worlds, wealth and struggle, power and perseverance, stood as equals, their hearts intertwined by a truth that had changed everything. Naomi rested her head against his chest, his heart beat steady against her cheek. For the first time, she felt not just safe, but whole. As they stood together, the skyline glittering, Naomi thought of the journey that had brought them here. A whisper in a conference room, a fight against betrayal, a truth that refused to be silenced. She'd been called a nobody, but her voice had toppled empires. David's arms tightened around her, and she knew this was their new dawn. A future built on trust, love, and the courage to stand for what was right. The city pulsed below, alive with possibility. And in that moment, Naomi and David knew that sometimes the poorest voice carries the richest truth, and that truth can change everything.